Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, the fascinating, sometimes maybe a bit challenging ideas of Ibn Arabi, a really major figure in Islamic spirituality.
Indeed. And we're primarily using Henry Corbin's book, Alone with the Alone, Creative Imagination in the Sufism of Ibn Arabi, as our sort of guide map.
Right, and look, if Ibn Arabi isn't a name you hear every day, that's completely fine. No worries. Our goal here is really to pull out the core insights from Corbin's work.
And make them clear, engaging, hopefully, for anyone curious, anyone looking to learn something profound.
Exactly.
Because Ibn Arabi, he lived way back in the 12th and 13th centuries.
hmm
And his work has had this huge influence on mystical thinkers, really across different traditions.
But it's also, as you mentioned before we started, often misunderstood.
Yeah, that's true. His ideas have often been, let's say, misinterpreted, both by people within Islamic thought and those outside it too.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. What makes his work, so tricky to grasp sometimes? Why the misunderstandings?
Well, there are a couple of key things, I think. First, honestly, not a huge amount of his writing has actually been translated into non-Arabic languages. That's a big barrier.
Access.
Access, exactly. And secondly, there's this real temptation, it seems, to try and slot his ideas, which are quite complex, into familiar Western philosophical boxes.
Oh, you are.
Labels like monism or pantheism. But these terms, they often just don't quite capture the subtleties of his perspective. It's quite unique.
Okay. So our aim today isn't about forcing Ibn Arabi into some pre-made Western category. What's the real mission here as we dive in?
Precisely. No forcing. Our mission really is to cut through some of that complexity, some of the jargon maybe, and get to the heart of Ibn Arabi's spiritual vision. And we're thinking particularly about those of you listening who might be searching for a deeper, maybe more personal way to understand the divine.
Something that resonates beyond, say, the usual structures.
Exactly. Something beyond the conventional religious frameworks.
Now, Corbin's analysis, it really puts a spotlight on Ibn Arabi's focus on the individual spiritual path, right? This idea of being alone with the day.
Absolutely. That's central. Ibn Arabi places enormous importance on what Corbin calls the most secret and most profound life of the soul.
Okay.
He really emphasizes that each person needs to find their own spiritual way, which, yeah, might mean stepping back a bit from purely social rules or, institutional religion.
So the genuine spiritual quest for him is deeply personal.
Deeply individual, yes.
And this is where that figure of Khidr comes in, this sort of mysterious guide Corbin mentions. Being a disciple of Khidr, what's that about?
Right, Khidr. To be a disciple of Khidr in this sense means prioritizing that personal, inner spiritual imperative, your own calling.
Over just fitting in.
Over just fitting in or conforming to external rules, exactly. You can think of Khidr as a kind of guide for those who don't quite fit the standard mold, the masterless, as Corbin puts it. People whose first loyalty is to their own inner sense of truth, their connection. Khidr's job, so to speak, is to help each individual find their own unique spiritual grasp.
Okay, this feels very different. I mean, really different from a kind of standardized one-size-fits-all spirituality.
Oh, it absolutely is. Khidr doesn't lead everyone down the exact same path to the exact same vision of God, no.
But what does he do?
He guides each seeker towards the particular manifestation, the theophany, of the divine that resonates with their own inner heaven.
Their inner heaven.
Yeah, with the very core of their being. Ibn Arabi has a term for this, their eternal individuality, or eniyat habit.
Wow. Like everyone has their own frequency.
That's a great way to put it. Like a unique spiritual frequency that resonates with a particular aspect or name of the divine.
So it's really about finding the Khidra of your being, like inside yourself, tapping into that inner compass.
Precisely. The source of true spiritual life, what's sometimes called the water of life. It flows from this inner depth. Corbin beautifully calls it the prophet of your being. And reaching this point means developing an aptitude for theophanic vision. Basically, the ability to perceive and encounter what Ibn Arabi calls your divine alter ego.
Okay, that's a lot to take in already. Let's maybe step back for a second, look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
What was the sort of historical and intellectual world that shaped Ibn Arabi? Corbin mentions Andalusia and Iran.
Right, the context is key. Geographically, both Andalusia, where Ibn Arabi was born, and Persia, or Iran, were incredibly important. There was this vibrant back and forth of ideas.
And philosophically.
Philosophically, Neoplatonic ideas about angels were a huge influence, especially as developed by thinkers like Avicenna.
With Avicenna, okay.
Specifically, his concept of the active intelligence. This was often identified with the Holy Spirit or the angel Gabriel, seen as the angel of knowledge in Revelation. It was really central to what they called prophetic philosophy back then.
And this active intelligence, it wasn't just an abstract idea. It had a spiritual weight to it.
Oh, absolutely. It was considered the very source of prophetic insight, deeply connected to spiritual reality. And interestingly, Ibn Arabi's teachings were later picked up and integrated into Iranian Shi'ism.
By figures like Haydar Amali.
Exactly, Haydar Amali. Some scholars actually see this as a kind of maybe reintegration, hinting that these ideas might have had even earlier roots in that Shiite tradition.
Fascinating. Corbin also brings up spiritual hermeneutics, or Tawil. What does that term signify here?
Tawil is really crucial. It basically refers to a method of interpreting spiritual texts, the Quran especially.
Okay.
But it goes beyond just the literal words on the page. It's about uncovering deeper, hidden, esoteric
But
meaning.
not just making things up.
No, definitely not just subjective fancy. For Ibn Arabi and also for Suhrawardi, another major figure, Tawil actually has objective principles. They believed it was grounded in what they call the philosophy of light.
The philosophy of light.
Yeah, providing a kind of structured way to understand the symbolic language of the spiritual world. Think of it like a key, a method for unlocking the deeper layers within the sacred texts.
Let's switch gears slightly to Ibn Arabi's own life. Corbin highlights his 40th year as being pretty significant.
Yes, the 40th year often comes up. It's seen as this potentially pivotal time, a point where that decisive encounter with the personal guide, the potential to really become a disciple of Khidr, could fully blossom.
And things happened around then.
Seems so. Around this time, Ibn Arabi apparently experienced a kind of mystical initiation, or investiture, in Mosul. And later, in Cairo, he reported a profound vision where a heavenly messenger basically revealed the core of his teachings to him.
And his travels eventually led him to Konya, in modern Turkey. That became an important center, too.
Exactly. His time in Konya was really significant. That's where he met his most important student, Sadruddin Kunyawi.
Ah, Konya.
Yes, and Kunyawi was vital. He played a huge role in bringing Ibn Arabi's teachings together with the Sufi traditions already flourishing in the East. He was a major intellectual figure in his own right, a real crossroads for different mystical and philosophical ideas.
And then there's Mecca. It was during his time there, Corbin says, that he conceived his huge work, the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, often called the Bible of Esoterism in Islam. That's quite a claim.
It is quite a title. The Futuhat al-Makkiyah, which translates roughly as the spiritual conquests or illuminations of Mecca, it was apparently inspired by visions and insights he had while circling the Kaaba.
During the Hajj rituals.
During the circumambulations, yes. And this work is massive. It covers an incredible range: core doctrine, spiritual practices, mystical states, levels of perfection, the whole relationship between God and the soul, even descriptions of esoteric worlds or abodes.
Wow.
It's truly a comprehensive map of his entire spiritual cosmology.
Corbin draws this really interesting comparison between esoterism in Islam and the notion of Christian esoterism. What are the main differences he points out?
Well, Corbin suggests that while both traditions, grapple with hidden meanings in their scriptures, their historical developments went in quite different directions.
Oh, so.
In Christianity, he argues, the condemnation of Montanism, way back in the 2nd century.
Montanism.
Yeah, a prophetic movement. Its condemnation essentially shut the door, or at least made it much harder, for new prophetic revelations or independent spiritual interpretations to thrive within the mainstream church. The authority of a central dogmatic teaching body, the magisterium, became really dominant.
Okay, I see. And that contrasts with Islam.
Precisely. Islam, historically, never developed a single centralized dogmatic authority or the equivalent of church councils in quite the same way.
Even within Shiaism.
Even the Shiite imamate, while holding immense spiritual authority for his followers, doesn't function like a dogmatic pontificate deciding doctrine for everyone in the same manner as, say, the papacy. This just created a different kind of intellectual and spiritual environment, an environment where esoteric traditions, like Sufism, could continue to exist and evolve with perhaps less direct institutional pressure or condemnation.
Let's circle back to Towel for a second. Corbin stresses its existential implications, connecting it back to the disciples of Khidr. So it's clearly more than just a reading technique.
Oh, absolutely. For Ibn Arabi and those on his path, Tawwa isn't just some academic exercise. It's a transformative process. It actually changes your being, how you perceive reality.
Right.
The disciples of Khidr, in this view, represent this kind of timeless vertical lineage. They're united by this shared understanding, this way of seeing the deeper layers of revelation. Corbin talks about an invisible and always virtual community connected through Tawa.
Okay. He then introduces this concept, unio sympathetica, sympathetic union. How does that fit into Ibn Arabi's thought?
Unio sympathetica.
Yeah.
That's a really key idea.
Yeah.
It describes this deep inherent connection, almost a compassionate dialogue between the divine and all of creation.
Like a mutual relationship.
Exactly. Specifically between God and those Ibn Arabi calls his fedeli, his faithful devotees. And this is different from our usual ideas of compassion, which might just be, pity or mercy coming from some distant being. This is much more intimate.
This sounds like it connects to that famous sacred saying, the Hadith Qudsi. I was a hidden treasure and I yearned or loved to be known.
Spot on. That hadith is fundamental here. It reveals the divine passion, this inherent desire or love, hub, within God to reveal himself, to be known. And that yearning is the very engine of creation.
So creation isn't just God making separate stuff.
Not in Ibn Arabi's view. It's more like a continuous unfolding of theophanies to jaliyat. Different ways the divine essence manifests itself, reveals itself. And this leads into his really complex understanding of the divine names. They aren't just static labels or qualities. They're active forces, powers that shape reality and reveal the divine in countless forms.
And we understand these names through our own passion, our experience of them. It's not just intellectual.
Precisely. You don't just learn the names like definitions in a dictionary. We come to know them, understand them through our lived experience, through what Corbin calls our passion, or significatio passiva.
How they affect us.
Yes, how these names impact us, shape our reality, resonate within us. It's like, you learn about warmth by feeling the sun, not just by reading about thermodynamics. It's experiential.
This leads to that rather intriguing phrase, the pathetic God, and devotio sympathetica. Now, pathetic here doesn't mean what we usually think it means, right?
Right, that's important. It can be misleading. Pathetic God here uses pathetic in its older sense, relating to pathos, feeling, suffering, being affected.
So a God who feels.
A God who has pathos, yes. A capacity for feeling, for this divine yearning. According to Ibn Arabi, the true mystics, the Gnostics, don't find God primarily through abstract proofs or logic.
How then?
Through their own theopathy, maluhiyya, their direct experience, their undergoing, their feeling of the divine within themselves. This ties straight back to that maxim. He who knows himself knows his Lord. And devotio sympathetica then becomes the mystic's response. It's their way of engaging with this pathetic God, actively participating in and nurturing this divine passion with their own being, their own love and devotion. It's a mutual resonance.
There's that image Corbin uses about water taking the color of its container. That illustrates this connection without needing the Christian idea of incarnation.
Exactly. It's a classic Sufi image used by Junaid, Jamie, and others. It powerfully conveys this deep intermingling, this mutual reflection and influence between creator and creature, without implying a literal fusion or incarnation where one substance becomes another.
So unio mystica, that mystical union or sense of oneness, is essentially this unio sympathetica, a recognition of the self as a divine manifestation.
Yes, fundamentally, true mystical wisdom, marifa, involves seeing the self not just as some separate contingent creature, but as a theophany, a unique place where divine attributes, divine names are made manifest, made visible.
It's knowing yourself through God.
Exactly. Knowing yourself through God, in God, which is a profoundly different kind of knowledge than trying to know God by yourself as some object entirely separate from your own being.
Corbin then brings in the figure of Nizam and Ibn Arabi's famous poetry collection, the Diwan, the interpreter of ardent desires.
Yeah.
The love language in that poetry. It's not literal romance, is it?
Absolutely not.
No,
Though it sounds like intense love poetry, the amatory imagery, the longing, the descriptions of the beloved Nizam, it's all deeply symbolic.
Of what?
Of spiritual mysteries, of divine illuminations, of the relationship between the soul and God. Ibn Arabi himself wrote a commentary explaining this, warning against literalism.
Yeah.
We need to grasp what Corbin calls the theophanic mode of apperception.
Theophanic mode, meaning?
Meaning seeing divine archetypal realities or figures contemplated in concrete forms, whether those forms are perceived through the senses, like Nizam herself perhaps, or through the inner eye, the imagination.
And Nizam, this young woman, represents Sophia Eterna, eternal wisdom.
Precisely. She becomes an apparitional figure, a surat mithalia, apprehended by the imaginative faculty but seen on a visionary level. She's transfigured by theophanic light, revealing her deeper, transcendent dimension as this eternal wisdom.
This leads to a fascinating point about love itself. The mystic seeks the beloved outside, but then realizes the true beloved is within. The journey turns inward.
Exactly right. It's a common theme. The mystic's quest often starts with that outward search, drawn by an inner image of perfect beauty, a kind of echo or vestige of their transcendent counterpart, their Lord.
Mm.
But eventually, through experience, through toil perhaps, they come to realize that the true object of their longing, the real beloved, dwells deep within their own soul. And from then on, the search is primarily an inner one.
Which explains that paradox. The beloved is in him and not in him.
Perfectly. It captures that dynamic. And devotio sympathetica, that loving devotion, becomes the way this theophanic connection is substantiated, made real and effective, often focused upon a concrete, visible form, which again highlights the crucial role of imaginative power.
The power to see beyond the surface.
The power to perceive the divine light shining through the form.
Yes.
Corbin then gets into the creative feminine and the Mohammedan spirit. How do these concepts link up?
Okay, so in Ibn Arabi's cosmology, you often find these pairings. There's the spiritual Adam, Adam al-Hakiki, sometimes equated with the nous or first intellect.
Well,
And then there's the universal soul, nafs kuliya, often seen as a receptive principle, like a celestial Eve. Both relate to the ultimate divine essence.
right.
Now, the Mohammedan spirit, also identified with the Holy Spirit, or Archangel Gabriel, is seen as the first created, the protokistos. And it's particularly associated with the divine name Al-Rahman, the compassionate.
The compassion.
Yes, the source of all creative mercy. Corbin explicitly links this principle, this Rahman aspect, manifesting as the first created spirit, to the creative Sophia, divine wisdom.
And there's even a hadith Qudsi, a sacred saying, where God identifies the pure Mohammedan essence with the feminine figure celebrated in Arabic love poetry, and implicitly with the Sophia figure in Ibn Arabi's Diwan. It connects divine compassion, the feminine principle, and prophetic revelation.
So to really grasp the God revealed through this theophanic imagination, we need self-knowledge first. It's like looking in a mirror.
Absolutely. You have to understand the mirror, your own complex being, your own heart, to understand the reflection the God manifested through the imagination.
Even the God of regular faith.
Yes, even the God of conventional dogmatic faith, Ibn Arabi suggests, is raised to its deeper truth by the theophanic imagination. This faculty transmutes abstract doctrine into living, potent symbols experienced within the soul.
And creation itself. It's not a past event, but this continuous unfolding, a constant theophany.
That's right. Reality for Ibn Arabi is fundamentally the creature-creator Hak-Khalq, a single reality with two dimensions, God and world, eternally correlated. He suggests that many conventional believers are unaware of the constant metamorphoses, the ta'al of these theophanies. They don't recognize the God created in the faiths as a manifestation shaped by the divine creative imagination itself.
Whereas the Gnostic.
For the Gnostic, the one with Marifa, all authentic faiths are seen as different theophanic visions, different perspectives on the one reality. This leads to what Corbin calls a potential science of religions, understanding the unity behind the diversity.
But this doesn't erase the personal bond between an individual and their specific Lord, their Rab. It just contextualizes it.
Exactly. The Gnostics' connection to their Lord isn't just limited to the forms dictated by dogma. It arises from their deepest self, from the unique way the divine reality knows and manifests as them. It's profoundly personal, rooted in their enfabit.
Corbin then interprets the day of resurrection, not just end times, but also a kind of spiritual awakening, a realization of unity.
Precisely. While it definitely points to the ultimate eschatological event, it also has this immediate initiatic meaning. It signifies that moment of profound spiritual insight, perhaps happening right now for some, where the knots of rigid dogma dissolve. Particular beliefs become transparent mazahir, places of manifestation through which God is seen, contemplated according to the unique capacity of the individual heart.
And this reveals that paradoxical bond again, Lord and vassal, Rab and Marbub needing each other.
Yes, that reciprocal bond where neither can really be conceived without the other. The Lord needs the vassal through whom to manifest his lordship. The vassal needs the Lord as their origin and reality.
The idea of creation being renewed, like instant by instant, that's also key here.
Yes, very much so. Ibn Arabi posits this continuous renewal or recurrence of creation, Tajdid al-Khalq. It shares some surface similarity with Asharite atomism, but he uses it in a totally different metaphysical context.
Why is it important?
It's fundamental for understanding the secret of resurrection, Sir al-Bothwell Nash, and the continuous spiritual ascent of beings. It implies reality is constantly fluid, constantly being recreated.
And this ascent involves moving beyond dogma.
Yes, moving beyond the not, akuter, of fixed dogmatic beliefs, ilm alitikad, towards the direct visionary knowledge, ilm Jehudi, of the Gnostic, experiential knowing.
And this brings us back to that twofold dimension of beings. Creator-creature, divinity-humanity, representing unio sympathetica. Two sides of one coin.
Exactly. Every being holds this coincidentia oppositorum, this meeting of opposites. Hakalk, lahud nasud, rababt. This is the unio sympathetica.
And crucially, it's a theophanic union based on manifestation and experience.
Not a hypostatic union, not a merging of substances like in the Christian incarnation. That's a key distinction that helps clarify why Ibn Arabi's thought isn't simple monism or pantheism. There's always this polarity, this dialogue.
Corbin uses the analogy of the Quran containing what has happened and what hasn't happened yet.
Right, to illustrate this dual nature of being, simultaneously manifest and unmanifest, finite and infinite. A reality fully understood only by one who has themselves become a Quran, embodying both dimensions.
And the absolute key, the thread running through all of this, seems to be imagination. Kyle.
It is absolutely foundational. Imagination is the organ of theophany. It's the key to unlocking the meaning of everything we've discussed. And Ibn Arabi distinguishes between our everyday conjoined imagination, Kyle Mutasel, and a self-subsisting imagination, Kyle Munfasil.
Self-subsisting.
Yes, an intermediate imaginal world, the mundus imaginalis, or alam al-mithal, a world of archetypal idea images that have their own reality and can be perceived directly by mystics in visionary states.
And the heart, the qalb, is where our human imagination meets this bigger divine imagination.
Precisely. The heart, qalb, is understood as this subtle center, this organ of perception where our individual imagination is enveloped by or participates in the unconditioned divine imagination, the epiphany itself.
And this gives rest to him.
Yes, hima. The creative power of the heart, the concentration of spiritual energy. Through hima, the Gnostic can project what is reflected in the mirror of their heart into outward reality. They can manifest things through the power of the active or theophanic imagination.
So the hadra, the presence that the Gnostic experiences.
It mirrors all other presences, yes. It reflects the interconnectedness of all levels of reality, just like the Quran reflects everything.
Okay, so even prayer, it's not just asking for things, it becomes a form of theophany too.
Yes. In Ibn Arabi's system, prayer isn't some awkward exception. It's essential. It's understood as a creative prayer, especially when seen in light of creation itself being a continuous theophany driven by the theophanic imagination.
And the Fatiha, the opening of the Quran?
He sees it as a personal munajat, an intimate dialogue, a secret share between God and the worshiper. There's this beautiful reciprocity, like two mirrors infinitely reflecting each other. God speaks the first half, the servant the second, but they're intertwined.
Finally, Corbin touches on the form of God and that vision, the ruya, where the Prophet Muhammad reportedly saw his Lord in the form of a beautiful youth. But the Quran says, "Thou shalt not see me." Another paradox.
Another classic coincidentia oppositorum, yes, a meeting of apparent opposites. This mysterious youth, an image that Corbin notes resembles the Christus Saivanis in early Christian art, is interpreted theophanically. It represents the divine alter ego, the self in its transcendent aspect, the celestial pole of this biunity that constitutes the real self, both human and divine. It's a theophanic vision, not a literal seeing of the unknowable essence, and distinct from later ideas about incarnation.
Okay, let's try and pull the threads together. Summarize the main takeaways from this deep dive into Ibn Arabi via Corbin. What are the absolute key things for you, our listener, to hold on to?
Well, I think first is that profound emphasis on the individual's unique spiritual path. The necessity, perhaps, of looking beyond just the external to prescribed to find that personal connection being alone with the alone.
Finding your kidware within.
Finding your kidware within, exactly. Second, the absolute centrality of theophany, divine manifestation, mediated through the imagination, khayal, and the importance of tawil for understanding these symbolic appearances.
Right. And the pathetic God.
Yes. Third, that radical idea of a pathetic God, a God in sympathetic union, unio sympathetica, with creation, whose divine passion or yearning is met and nurtured by our own theopathy, our experience and devotion, that mutual relationship.
And finally,
underpinning it all, is the immense importance Ibn Arabi places on inner experience, on self-knowledge. He who knows himself knows his Lord. That's really the cornerstone of the Gnostic path he outlines.
This has certainly been mind-expanding, a journey into a really rich, very complex spiritual universe.
Hmm.
Hopefully, for you listening, our learner today, this deep dive has offered some genuine insights, maybe sparked a few of those aha we always aim for.
And perhaps a final thought to leave you with. Consider how this idea of your own inner heaven, their unique potential for a personal theophany, might reshape how you think about spirituality, about God, about yourself. Maybe take some time to reflect on the nature of your own imagination. What role does it play, or could it play, in how you perceive and interact with reality? It's really a profound journey of discovery, one that definitely continues long after our chat today.